All right, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we're going to get started here. Thank you for joining us this Cinco de Mayo for our presentation, Fiesta Without the Fiasco, Balancing Employee Experience and Legal Risk. So you're going to hear from us today, finding, hiring, and retaining good talent, good employees is the most important thing for companies in this kind of competitive environment that we live in and we work in right now. It's also one of the most difficult things to do. So today we hope to provide some insight from different professional perspectives of how to do that. So if you go to the next slide, my name is Jason Tremblay. For those who don't know, I am the Chicago office managing partner of Saul Ewing, and I'm also the vice chair of the firm's labor and employment practice group. I'm joined by my colleagues, Amanda Teskin of Stum Insurance, Kathleen Parhas of Beacon Hill Associates, and Prem Joshi of Multiplier. Each one of them are experts in their own areas, and we look forward to presenting today. Amanda is a benefits expert and will enlighten all of us on, among other things, what employees, applicants are demanding and what employers truly must have to remain competitive in this space. Kathleen is a staffing expert who delivers specialized staffing solutions to her clients across many industries. Among other things, she's going to provide some invaluable information about job trends, among other things. And Prem specializes basically in the professional employer organization space, the PEO space, with a concentration of working with companies with both domestic as well as international workforces, and of course, providing payroll solutions for those particular clients. And I, of course, am the legal experts who tell you a little bit about the do's and don'ts in employee selection, hiring, and retention. It's becoming extremely complex. Our contact details are available in the resources tab and at the bottom of your screen. If you go to the prior slide, but before we get into the meat of this, I do want to go over a few housekeeping matters. First of all, questions. To submit questions, please use the Q&A tool. We will try to answer as many questions as possible today if they come in, but we'll follow up by email, rest assured, if time runs short, or if, for example, you might have a question afterwards. Materials. You're going to receive a follow-up email following this presentation. It might be tomorrow, but it's going to be from our team in the coming days with the actual recording of the webinar, if you want to share it, the slides that we're going to be going through today, as well as our contact information if you want to talk to any one of us. Of course, what presentation would be without the legal disclaimer? So I have to say this, the provision and receipt of the information in this program is not legal advice, does not create a lawyer-client relationship, and should not be acted on without seeking professional counsel who have been informed of the specific facts of your situation. So if you go forward, as you can see, we've broken this presentation into three really primary sections. First, job market trends, which we hope will give you kind of the lay of the land, for lack of a better term, of what is occurring in the job market and in hiring in particular. The second is about maximizing the new hire experience. We all on this panel believe that there's a strong correlation between kind of the initial onboarding experience and what you do with employees right at the front end and employee retention. So you're going to hear a little bit about that. And third, we're each going to give kind of our thoughts, maybe our best practices on steps to retaining a strong workforce. So having said all those formalities, I'm going to pass the mic over to Kathleen to start us off on current job market trends.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. So again, hi, everyone. My name is Kathleen Parhas. I work for Beacon Hill. We do office professional placement on a temporary to hire, and direct hire basis. I sit here in the Chicagoland area, but we are a nationwide firm. So going to dive into a bit about the current job market trends that we have been seeing. Definitely seeing more needs-based hiring. So hiring has definitely shifted from cost-based to needs-based. So skills are definitely something that everybody seems to be looking for. A lot of teams are running very lean. So ideally looking for somebody who can hit the ground running faster, but also take them less time for that startup to actually get up and running in the role. Some examples that I have on my end that I've worked with clients recently. One example is I was working with a client that was targeting a contract recruiter. I'm sure you all know there's a lot of recruiters that are on the market currently, but this particular client was in the construction industry. They were targeting somebody who had worked on construction related positions previously, even though there might be some of those IT or technical recruiters that are available. They needed somebody who came from that construction background. So definitely seeing skilled based, particularly in manufacturing, tech and finance as well. Obviously, the trend that we're all seeing too is AI playing a big role across every industry. It seems like it is not so much taken over just yet, but it's definitely part of the integration process and upskilling for current talent. So integrating AI to be more productive in your day to day, and then also upskilling internal talent, ideally. So then that way, when they are looking for retention, they're able to, you know, parlay on some of those skills that they're able to, you know, AI literacy is going to be imperative moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Prem.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good afternoon, everyone. Prem Joshi with Multiplier. As Jason mentioned, we are a global organization with a really big focus on ensuring compliant onboarding and payments of your international staff. And to the point that Kathleen just mentioned with, the AI being brought into the workspace, a lot of the growth and transition that we're starting to also now see is organizations are really getting very intentional when it comes to their growth. So rather than just, filling a rec ID for this of, growth and broad expansion, really what's happening is, there's going to be skill specific hiring that takes place. And when it comes to those situations, what's now resulting is organizations are now leaning on more of a global scale when it comes to filling those seats. So no longer is global hiring a nice to have. It's actually now starting to become more of a competitive advantage. And really what this leans into is, quick to hire, really making sure we capitalize on the good talent that's out there. And in some of the research that we've even done from our end, about 49% of the leaders out there are really starting to believe and buy into global hiring being that essential component in order for them to be competitive. Oftentimes what we see is organizations face these challenges where, they're kind of stuck with, needing to fill a certain role, but the talent or even, AI may not necessarily be there to fill those shoes right away, which is what's, of course, ultimately leaning to this. As we transition over to the next slide, balancing this out really, from a office staff as opposed to work from home. I know Kathleen and her team have had a little bit more experience there. So Kathleen, please, would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. We're definitely seeing there's still a bit of a balance and a power struggle between return to the office and working from home. It seems like hybrid roles are very common, but strictly remote roles are becoming more scarce. However, we are seeing candidates willing to take more remote opportunities as opposed to on site. There's definitely, like I said, a power struggle between the two. So because of that, it's, shaping everything, shaping the talent strategy and continuing in onboarding and everything. So with that, we are seeing a bit of an uptick when it comes to contract work. Again, we're looking for certain skills to fill in those gaps that our clients are looking for. So it might be, somebody's going out on maternity leave or somebody goes out on medical leave unexpectedly. They need somebody who can come in and really keep the workflows going because the teams are already running very lean anyway. So they do need those experienced professionals who can come in and really commit to that project-based work. As far as the industries that we've been seeing to grow within each sector, definitely seeing construction and real estate to build all of these data centers and to, build all of these homes that we so desperately need. All of those things are coming full circle. So we are seeing a push within those industries of needing more construction and more real estate, and even on the supportive side, more of those. Finance and insurance, healthcare, those have been ones that have been pretty consistent, but again, very much need specialized roles and specialized skills within those positions. Healthcare, certain regions are more popular than others, but still growing. Supply chain and logistics has probably been the biggest trend I've seen personally. Within the last few years, with the supply chain challenges and things like that, this has been pretty quiet. But again, in order to get the materials to build the construction and to do the real estate, they need those materials to come through the supply chain and through trucking and through airlines and things like that. So we are seeing an uptick on the supply chain and logistics side as well.
Great. And so who's going to talk about? Yep, here we go, Amanda. Sorry.
No, you're good. Amanda Teskin here. Again, I'm with Stum Insurance. So we are a Chicagoland-based benefits broker focused on helping small and mid-sized businesses for the most part. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about just kind of what we're hearing people say that benefits are that candidates are asking about. What's coming up in an interview process. The first one, probably not surprising, medical. It's always going to be kind of the first thing people ask about, right? They want to know, do you have it, first of all? How much will it cost me? Which carrier is it? There's all kind of the preferences around that. But what I really want to focus on is the idea of variety. Again, we focus mostly on small to mid-sized businesses, and a lot of the time I talk with people who aren't sure they can offer a variety. They maybe only have one or two plans. But in this world where we're hiring needs to be really specific, and a really ideal candidate could have different insurance needs than somebody else. We find and say people buy their insurance like they buy anything based on what they want, what they need, and what they can afford. And that's going to be different for everybody. Even different candidates for the same position could just be in really different life circumstances and need different insurance. So there's ways to do that where it's pretty cost neutral for the business. So you're offering a good variety without having to upset anyone on the finance side with moving budgets. So that's one key thing. The other one that I wanted to point out was the concept of a dependent care FSA. It kind of has hit the headlines lately. So it's something that I think some HR people are hearing questions about for the first time, maybe in a long time, that candidates are asking, do you have this? I've heard it's great and I want it. It is top of mind because obviously the contribution limit was increased for the first time in about 25 years this year. So it went all the way up to $7,500. So just a kind of unique thing that really can be very not significant cost for a business to offer it, but can have a really great impact. And of course that applies to, daycare and things like that. But also, as we have an aging population of older parents of people working, it can also help support any sort of daycare or things like that for aging parents, or all sorts of other things tied into that. I'm going to pass it, I think, back to Jason for
the next slide. Well, that's fascinating, Amanda, because I'm actually getting a lot of inquiries from clients that I have about just kind of the questions, information that's being requested on the benefits perk front from applicants, even kind of at the very beginning. So that's really important to kind of understand where, what not only what you offer, but have the most competitive package you can so that you can sell the company. But legally speaking, and I get to talk about the kind of the law side of it. Legally speaking, hiring employees is selecting and hiring employees is becoming more and more difficult from state and local laws on what you can ask, what you can consider, what you can't consider, what you have to provide, what you can't provide. And this slide summarizes some of those. So again, probably each one of these, sadly, can be an hour-long webinar. which we don't have time for today. So I'm going to try to, from a 30,000 foot view, just kind of see where things are so you can issue spot as you're looking through this. So one of the biggest things that I'm, obviously that you're aware of is compensation and benefit disclosure laws. I think currently, there's 15 separate states and even some local jurisdictions that require some form of pre-hire compensation and or benefit disclosure and or restriction. So the goal there, right, is to, is transparency in compensation and benefits. And so that if there is any pay inequity as someone comes over due to some protected class, that if that exists, that it's not perpetuated or that it's not continued. I don't probably have to educate anybody here on this webinar, but that in Illinois in 2025, we passed our own kind of salary transparency law, which really applies to almost all employers, whether they actually advertise the jobs themselves or whether they actually hire a third party to do so. And what's kind of important in today's hybrid virtual work environment, it applies not only to Illinois employees, but those remote employees, right, who might work in other states who are essentially reporting to Illinois, reporting to supervisors in Illinois. So it's much broader than simply, brick and mortar locations that might be here in Illinois. And what is required and what employers can and can't do in this regard, it really does vary pretty widely between jurisdictions. Some states like Illinois prohibit inquiries into prior compensation. You can't ask, well, what did you make at your prior employer? And there's a lot of states that are starting to do that. So this whole salary transparency, pay equity is a huge area that you got to be aware of. And again, whether you're doing it yourself or you're having some third party do it for you, because you could be vicariously liable for that. Another area that's been around for a long time is this whole area of background checks, right? What you can and can't do when you actually get background information from third parties. So you have both federal law and you have state laws. You got the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which puts a number of requirements on, such as notice, consent requirements to pull third-party consumer background checks, and those that you're pulling it, and sort of restrictions on what you can do with that information. Pre-adverse and post-adverse action notices, which can be somewhat, formulaic, but are very important to follow. You also have state, what I call ban the box laws, similar laws that restrict what employers, what they can ask and what they can use for purposes of, hiring or taking other, what I call employment actions or tangible employment actions regarding, someone who's been arrested or someone who has a criminal conviction. In Illinois, for example, again, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know, you can't base an employment decision based on an employee's arrest. So you get these background checks, which are notoriously inaccurate because they're not comprehensive, usually, of the entire country. And it might reflect an arrest that didn't lead to a conviction. Well, you can maybe consider the underlying circumstances, but there's restrictions on your ability to use that as a basis not to hire. Same thing if it's actually a conviction. In Illinois, you can't base an employment decision on a criminal conviction with limited exceptions, unless it what I'd like to say substantially relates to the job or places or poses an unreasonable risk to property or person. And even then, you still have to disclose to the applicant or the employee, what you're doing and what you're basing on it, and outline for them what their rights are if they disagree with it. So failure to follow any one of these rules, and again, it varies by state, can lead to liability. It's gotten so regulated in this area that, I have a lot of clients that are simply not really even conducting background checks anymore. I'm not a fan of that. But I'm seeing that more and more based on the cost and the limited utility that some of those may have done. And I really kind of avoided getting into kind of medical and drug testing and the restrictions that are associated with that, especially in Illinois and other states that have legalized marijuana, THC on a state level. But there's, again, the use and the drug testing and whether or not you hire someone is fraught with pitfalls that you need to be careful of. So it's not submit an application and go hire and everything's great. And finally, or maybe not finally, but something I do want to raise here, and we addressed this before, is kind of AI in the selection process. Right? There's a law modification to the Illinois Human Rights Act that just took effect in earlier this year that regulates employers' use of AI in the hiring and interviewing process. So it obligates, right, employers or third parties that are engaged by employers to inform applicants if AI technology is being used, right, to select their resume, to screen their interview, or to use certain voice recognition. These are all things that are becoming more and more prevalent in today's day and age when you get lots of applications and lots of employment matters. And so, whether you use AI in a discriminatory fashion, now you actually have to disclose it. And it's interesting because in Illinois, at least, the required notice has to provide a number of things, right? It has to provide information such as the actual AI product that is being used, the name of it, the developer of it, the kind of the employment decision that it is applying to, or that it influences, the purpose of it. It also has to include essentially a point of contact or a person to contact in case there's any questions. And of course, as you can imagine, the right to request some sort of reasonable accommodation under disability accommodation law. So that now is an obligation if you're using this in this process, or if a third party that you're hiring to do this for you is doing it. So it's really important to be aware of these things. They're evolving very quickly. And if we talk about AI, it might be different in a month from now. And I guess finally, one of the bigger issues that you have to be aware of, just it's more timely now, is kind of these diversity quotas and criteria. What constitutes illegal DEI under kind of the current administration has been, to say bluntly or mildly, kind of a hotbed issue over the past 2 years, right? Many employers have been wrestling with this question over the last couple of years based on the executive orders that were issued. And kind of not here to kind of resolve that issue or say, hey, this is the right path. But, if there are objective or even subjective criteria that you want to employ within your own company to hire and become more diverse, there's certain restrictions and things that you have to be careful of now in order to not run afoul of that, right? Unless you're trying to hire someone that is disabled or a veteran status, which seem to have been avoided from this analysis. Using really any other protected criteria can really be fraught with some issues. So those are all things to kind of think about, to be aware of. There's a lot more we can get into. We don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but those are kind of the trends that I see from a legal perspective in the hiring and retention space. So if we go to the next slide, I believe I'm passing the mic off possibly to maybe Prem, I think, on this one, or I could be wrong, but someone to take us off on maximizing the new hire experience.
Yeah, first I'll go and then I'll pass it off to Prem here shortly. But thank you, Jason. So yeah, maximizing the new hire experience. If you want to go to the next slide. For me, this is something that we deal with on a daily basis. So according to Bamboo HR, 7 of 10 employees are likely to stay for 3+ years after having a positive onboarding experience. So needless to say, this is very important. And the smoother, the better. There's a lot of things that can happen, whether it's, not getting proper documents on time, things like that. It's very, very important. And then that goes into really the first 90 days of any position, whether it's a contract role or a permanent role. Those are the most important days. We always tell candidates and say to our clients as well, candidates are usually on their best behavior for the first 90 days. So if there's any red flags or anything like that that come up within the first 90 days, that's the time to get ahead of it, because those are just going to get worse after, the first 3 months. So it's very important to stay on top of that. But also that means that our clients and companies have to do their best to make sure that all the expectations are laid out for the candidate as well. The worst thing is that, somebody joins a position and the expectations aren't laid out, or it feels chaotic and they don't know what they can do to be successful within the first 90 days. And that's a red flag for the candidate, which produces turnover. And we all know how that goes. So the first 90 days are very important. So Prem, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Kathleen. And yes, awesome points. Those 90 days truly are so crucial, right? In my previous life, I used to be on the HR team for a publicly traded organization, helped build out that team. And, that was always a forefront for us where, hey, we got to make sure that our ducks are in a row, right? And just as much as like the employee is gauging, the organization those first 90 days, it's imperative that the organization has everything together from their end as well when it comes to that documentation, right? A lot of times when I talk to folks, what I learn is, about 46% of professionals out there are failing to hire. And a lot of that reasoning is behind compliance issues. And of that 46%, about 33% typically lies into those key employment related challenges, right? So whether it be I-9 related, whether it be your visas, immigration related matters for your international staff. So yes, very crucial to make sure we've got those documents in line. And then ultimately leading to a bit more of that, compliant process, right? And oftentimes, from an admin standpoint, what we often see too is, the need to have to juggle, whether it be fragmented payroll systems and, inconsistent compliance rules, whether it be state to state, or even across the borders. And oftentimes just, leading to potential delays in just getting someone hired, right? Whether it be hardware, things of that nature. So really what we're starting to see is that yes, the desire is there, but oftentimes organizations tend to lack that infrastructure really to put their best foot forward. So as we transition over to the next slide, some of the other pitfalls that we've learned to kind of help our partners navigate through is really avoiding those misclassifications, right? I talked a little bit earlier about how leaders are starting to look at that global to fill those talents, but really, what we're starting to find out is 92% are aware that there's risk that they could potentially be facing, but really about 8% are ready and feel good to tackle that risk. So that's that's a big red flag, just because again, it goes back to the desires there, but the resources are ultimately not. And then, speaking of those resources, I talked a little bit about those stats earlier, right? About the 46% and such. What we've also learned to find is that when we bring these new folks into the organization, it's very important to make sure that the new hire ends up feeling connected, whether it be with their immediate team, whether it be back to HQ, whatever that dynamic might end up looking like. Oftentimes, with employees feeling like they are on that island, it ends up, playing a big role in potentially looking elsewhere. I was actually talking to a nonprofit not too long ago, where they were kind of balancing a little bit of that same issue where they were tackling misclassifications for a few of their consultants out in Africa, but at the same time, they were also battling transitioning them into the way the organization works here in the United States. So ultimately it's what are we doing, whether it's to give that holistic, experience from a technology standpoint, from a interaction standpoint. And I think all of that starts, from the initial hiring process, right? So as we transition over to the next slide, I think I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic off to Amanda.
Hi, yes. Thanks, Prem. So I wouldn't be in benefits if I didn't talk a little bit about deadlines and dates and things like that. So 90 days, I think, is going to be stuck in everyone's head after day, but that's good. That's important, especially when it comes to new hires. Thinking first just about eligibility dates. Sometimes it's like the simple things that can trip someone up. So it's kind of a minimum and a maximum to have in your head of what you could write policies to be. Minimum is always going to be date of hire, right? That's the soonest you can start benefits. And your maximum is 90 days. So every once in a while we'll run into a group and their policy language, or at least their communication to employees, will say benefits start first of the month following 90. that would actually be out of compliance. So simple tweaks like that just prevent, snowballing into an issue should anything come ahead. A note about what best practices, we find a lot of businesses transitioning towards some sort of language about first of the month following. So that could be first of the month following date of hire, 30 days, 60 days, something still within that 90-day window. But then it becomes not something that you have to think about every day. It's really just one time a month. You're like, okay, who's coming up, who's getting eligible, and thinking about it versus any day of the month could be someone's 30-day, 60-day, or so on. So something to do there. And also good to just know what your specific policies say. I was just talking with a business a couple weeks ago, and when we dug into what their actual policy said, they actually had a mixture. The medical was first following 30, but then some of their ancillaries were 30 days. So they were actually, they were operating based on the medical, but then weren't in line with their policies. Or some businesses sometimes run multiple ones, right? So they're having new hires go through an enrollment for medical, and then 30 days later going through the enrollment for dental. As Kathleen said, right, this is your opportunity for a first impression. So want to make it as seamless as possible. So my last point on here is just, this is your opportunity to show off your company culture to new people who you're hoping to stick around for a long time. So some points to kind of help make that as positive experience as possible. When it comes to the education tools, what does your benefit guide look like? What sort of meeting recordings do employees have the opportunity to watch, to understand? And are those pieces complete? Do they have as many of the answers that they might come up with in there? Are the SBCs included? These simple things that are a compliance concern, and also just people want all the information ready to go. Is it easy to access? Thinking also about, how people enroll. If it's on a website, does that website work well? Is it a clunky paper process that could be trimmed down? All things that we can work towards to make the experience better. And then should, you have great materials, everything's ready to go, but people just still have questions, right? There's people with really unique situations, medications they're on that they just need some more guidance on. So important to have access to experts for questions. Many HR leaders we talk to don't want to be that person giving advice. And I'm sure Jason would echo that they probably shouldn't be. So really important to have a really clear and easy way for employees to find their way to an expert that can help them listen to their exact scenario and truly give some direct advice to help them make the right choice that will work for them and their loved ones for a year or many years to come. And with that, I'll pass it over to Jason.
Great, thank you. And I can't agree with Amanda more. And I kind of think I said this at the top of the hour that there's a big correlation between kind of how the new employee experience is and retention. And so in addition to what Amanda added, there are quite a few other things that, at least from my perspective, and is kind of legal and not legal. So if you go to the next slide, we will start to get into these. But again, I kind of see this as really legal, non-legal advice. But these are kind of tips of the trade that I think are really, really important. And if not implemented, are really represents a missed opportunity. So I want to take a little bit of time. Amanda kind of alluded to it about kind of the benefits of a successful orientation and onboarding program. I think one of the best steps, right, to retaining talent is starting on the right foot on day one. Okay. And from an HR culture perspective, the orientation program, if you have one, you should, is really the best ways to do it. And these orientation programs, there's no kind of one size fits all. They can vary widely based on industry, based on who your personnel are, based on the size of the company. But all companies should have some formal orientation outline or program that contains all the points kind of in this slide. I like to say that employees are going to get an orientation, right? One way or the other. It just depends on who's going to give that to them. Is it going to be the company that is going to outline some of these things, or is it going to be by the disgruntled employee who just is 1 foot out the door and is poisoning the well? I see it all the time. And again, the orientation program is important to do a number of things, right? It just communicates what the company's about. Like, where did they come from? What are we all about? Where do you fit into the piece of this puzzle? Sometimes that goes a long way just to getting buy-in from employees who, to be honest, are completely overwhelmed their first few days or first few weeks at a new company and a new job. It sets expectations on what our culture is, how we collaborate, and how we communicate. It also sends a message that from day one, we care about you. We want to start you off on the right foot. It's not an exact science. There's a little bit of an art to it. But at least I think more often than not, this will communicate to the employee the importance of the employee to the company and what the company is all about. Of course, it's the time, like Amanda said, to communicate important policies or programs or initiatives, such as, right, anti-harassment. You got to do that anyway in Illinois and many states. So you might as well make that part of your orientation program or orientation week. But, if you're in an industrial setting, here's what we do for safety, and here's how you report safety, and this is who you report to. I'm always a big fan of setting up a new employee with a mentor, someone that is a good messenger, someone that will be available, someone that will communicate and be there, because a lot of times these employees don't know where to ask. They're saying, "Oh, meet John, Mary, Ralph, John," and then they don't even remember their name. So you really should have like a point person or two for them to reach out to. And I'm always a big fan of setting up just informal, lunches and get-togethers to welcome employees. Sometimes it's not possible, but if you can incorporate that into your onboarding process, I think it really goes a long, long way to, again, getting that employee through that 90 days, getting to the point where there's buy-in from that particular employee. It doesn't always work, but it works more often than not. And so again, big fan of an orientation program. It can evolve over time. And it can be catered to that, but it can be simply a checklist of things to go through at the bare minimum. So that is orientation programs in a nutshell. If we go to the next slide, there are some other legal requirements, and we've kind of touched on these a little bit with some of the other presenters, but Prem kind of mentioned this before. This whole issue of kind of I-9s. Don't forget and gloss over some of these really important things to think about at the outset. I think they'll save a lot of heartache down the road. They will also, put the employee probably in a better position and the company in a better position to make that employee successful. So, right, you got to get all the tax forms and the I-9s and everything else you need to do. You have HR people that'll do that and have a checklist, and you'll get that. One thing that I think I see sometimes is there's a disconnect between what position they're hired for or what they're expected to do and what they think they're expected to do. So sometimes that would be outlined in an offer letter, but offer letters aren't really that detailed. They talk about the title and the pay and maybe what your duties and responsibilities are, but really confirm what the terms of the employment are. What are the expectations? Set that out really early on. Most people would have a job description. Make sure that's accurate. Make sure there's continuity and just consistency, shall we say, between what you really expect that employee to do and what they were hired to do, and make sure they understand that. Because if that goes sideways from the very beginning, it's hard to get that back on path, right? Hard to get that back realigned. It becomes I was hired for this, but I'm expected to do this. The sooner you have that conversation aligned, the easier it'll be to keep that train on the track, so to speak. If there are restrictive covenants, and again, this is not a legal webinar on restrictive covenant law, but if that employee does have restrictive covenants, really make sure that they understand what they are. I can't tell you how many times I have a client that's hiring someone and they have a restrictive covenant from their prior employer, and they say, "Well, I just signed something. I have no idea what it says." Well, take some time to make sure that employee does know. I think it helps the employer as to what they can expect from that employee. And hopefully that's done obviously before hiring, but if not, let's make sure that we understand what those restrictions are. But more importantly, if you are imposing restrictions on that employee, make sure they're enforceable, right? You may need to talk to legal counsel. You may not. This area of restrictive covenant law varies by state, and it varies over time. So, if you are using standard employment agreements or restrictive covenant agreements, just make sure that those are updated or at least reviewed regularly, so that you know what your rights and obligations are, and so that you can communicate to the employee what the rights and regulations are or obligations are. And then one other thing is, we've kind of talked about this, but there's a lot of variety in it, is setting up personnel files, electronic and paper, some half and half. Just make sure there's a system whereby you're collecting that, right? There's some states that require personnel files. There's other states that don't require it, but if you have them, you have to keep them in a certain way. So just make sure your HR folks understand that. Most states, not all, well, maybe not most, a lot of states require employers to give access to their employees, to their personnel files. So it's important to know what needs to be in there, when it needs to be in there, how long it needs to be kept, and whether employees are entitled to view those. So just make sure these formalities and those legalities before we get too far in advance. And again, I think those are just steps you can take to maximize the new hire experience. So having said that, let's go to the next slide. And I think this is the last section we're here to talk about, which is steps to retaining a strong workforce. And if you go to the next slide, maybe is it Amanda, I think, might be starting off with this particular slide. So I'll hand the mic off to Amanda at this point.
Hi, yeah, I'm excited to kick this off. Obviously, we just kind of went through what a huge undertaking hiring is. So once we get those people in, they're who we want, all our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted. It's really important to retain those employees, and ensuring your benefits program is competitive with regular benchmarking is a great way to do that, because you can set up a great benefit program, but then if it kind of goes on autopilot for a couple of years, maybe the market's changed and things have shifted. So it's hard to stay on track with it. And a lot of the time, you get feedback from employees or candidates. It's expensive. My doctor's not enough, who knows what. But that can be kind of hard to bring up to management, to leadership, as like, hey, we're just hearing this. But putting it in the form of something like benchmarking really solidifies it, makes it unbiased, and can just kind of help that decision-making process. So we work with about 700 different businesses. So we're able to compile all their data year over year, what they're doing on average, and then use that, just kind of give a peek inside your neighbor, right? What are they doing? What are their benefits look like? And where you stack up against them. So this first one, we'll just go through a PPO, what the current, these actually were just updated after kind of all the 1-1s and whatnot of the last renewal season got finalized. So you can see here, there's just kind of a couple different columns and then some different areas that we compare and contrast with. So that top bar in green with single premium, probably not shocking to anybody on this call, but there was a pretty significant jump on the average cost of a PPO. I think it was making headlines all over, kind of the just shifts in costs for a million reasons. And I could spend an hour just on that, but we won't do that today. For today's purposes, it's just a matter that it's gone up. So that in and of itself, in a vacuum, it could feel like, whoa, our costs really changed. With some real data behind it, okay, it's the move of the industry or whatnot, great. But obviously there's tons of different PPOs out there. So it matters, well, what kind of PPO is someone buying on average for just over $1,000? So that next blue section kind of just goes through average plan design that we're seeing. From simple things like the copay to the deductible, co-insurance, out-of-pocket max. So we track that over time, and it kind of helps you level things out. If your premium's higher or lower, well, is that because your plan design is richer or not? To give some context to it. Then also really importantly is, what are employees being asked to share in that? What's a contribution strategy like? Is it competitive? Employees coming in saying, oh, this feels expensive. Is it? Let's look at it. So we look at it two different ways. The green section goes over it in just plain dollars, broken out by tier. But again, we know that that premium is going to change. So we also look at it just on a percentage basis, because sometimes that can be more applicable to what people are seeing there. So these change and move over time. But again, the goal being to just kind of identify the levers that you can pull when it comes up to renewal. Hey, our premium is going up. Well, look, we've checked our benchmarks. and our deductible is actually way under benchmarks. Maybe you have $1,000 deductible. Okay, that's something we could play with that and not risk becoming a really uncompetitive employer in the market. Or a lot of the time we'll see just kind of in the contribution structure, maybe the employee cost is high, but the family cost is really low and competitive. And again, it's just an opportunity for a conversation with the employer. Hey, is that what we're intending to do? Do we want to shift that so our employees, if we're trying to hire younger or, you know, warehouse workers or whatnot, do we want to just shift where those dollars are? So we think of it as kind of a roadmap, levers to pull. You know, medical is kind of the biggest piece of this, but if we go to the next slide, we also keep track of all the non-medical coverages. So these go over things like dental. You can see this is a percent of businesses who offer it. It's almost on par with medical. It's kind of table stakes to be offering a benefits program at this point, is to offer some sort of dental insurance. Cost sharing wise, the average is businesses are going about 50-50 with employees on that. And then monthly premium we track, again, just to know kind of when we're talking with business, and so you know when you're reviewing, is my rate competitive? Am I rate outside of norms or whatnot? To kind of keep an eye on that. Vision is coming right up along with that. About 96% of employers are now offering that. If we go back further on this chart into 2023 and 2022, you'll see that number's been steadily coming up over time, that more and more businesses, it's again becoming table stakes to offer vision. Life insurance, and then the 2 disabilities, you'll see those numbers is just a little bit lower, but coming more and more popular. We again use this as, and the benefit of it, I suppose, is to see, okay, maybe our medical insurance is going to go up. Everyone's going to have to pay $10 more a month. Well, we don't offer short-term disability right now. Maybe we can throw that in. That's relatively low cost. Helps with the messaging. Again, you're just identifying different levers to pull. If we have to raise this one, we can add this benefit to kind of even things out, make the messaging as positive as possible, versus kind of just going in blind and hoping people are receptive to it. So again, I think the benefit of having some sort of benchmarking data to compare to is getting that unbiased feedback on your program, where it's not just word on the street, what people are saying. It's true unbiased feedback that you can bring up to leadership and make sure that you're staying competitive and not losing these employees that you spent so much time and energy hiring and bringing on board in the right way.
Hey, Amanda, this is Jason. I actually have one question myself, but we also have a question that's been posed, which I also had. The question is, where are the premiums? Where are those premiums with benchmarking premiums? Are those Illinois, Midwest, national? If you know, that's the group question. Then I have a question after you're done with that.
Perfect. I can answer that. It is, so we again work with about 700 businesses. The majority of those are in Illinois, but it does include all of our non-Illinois groups as well, kind of mixed in together. It's probably, if I had to throw a number at it, like 75% Illinois and then 25% various other states.
Right. And then this is more of a practical question. I know you're usually dealing with the company. Do you know how often the company is sharing some of this benchmarking data with their employees to justify their decisions? And whether that's beneficial or not. I mean, I could see it being very beneficial if you have to explain a $300 a month premium increase. But do you know how prevalent that is?
Yeah, I think it's more anecdotally shared versus showing like these exact charts to the employees that might welcome even more questions than necessarily you want. But a lot of the time, and candidly, we like to be in those open enrollment meetings running it with people. And so a lot of time it's as simple as saying, we took a look at the market of what's happening out there. And we found that this or this, and that's why we made this change or this change, more than, putting a chart or anything in the open enrollment materials.
Awesome. No, thank you. It's helpful to know that. Do you have more? Do we have a next slide or?
No, I think I'm passing it over to Kathleen again.
Yeah. There you
go. Okay, great. If you want to go to the next slide. Just to kind of wrap some things up here, basically everybody has been talking about, this is wrapping everything up as far as transparency and building that trust. strategic hiring is going to be there, and being transparent upfront is, very important as far as, continuing to retain that strong workforce. You want to make sure that you do those performance check-ins, make sure that, you're talking with those poor performers immediately, making sure that you're proactive about, what it is that you can do, so you're not hesitant about poor exits and everything. Promotion mobility is really important. Like, what are some of the things that you look for when it comes to internally? Where can some of that retention build, and starting that conversation early and making sure that those people know what those expectations are for that professional growth and even those promotions. Work-life balance is very key. I think that that's something that all of us can see as a positive, and something that more and more people are talking about. Recognizing those performance indicators that you have those expectations on, and creating a positive culture. I think those are the biggest things when it comes to retaining a strong workforce within your organization. And just, again, it's going back to everything that we've talked about from the beginning, like being very intentional, making sure that you have all your ducks in a row, because at the end of the day, that is your employee brand. And that is what you want to put forth with not only your candidates, but your current employees too.
I'm happy to chime in here real quickly as well. I can probably talk about each one of these, but kind of the three bigger ones that I generally see, either from a legal and from an HR side, is, kind of exiting the poor performer soon, I think is really important, right? Don't delay. It leads to a whole lot of issues, not only legal, right? No good deed goes unpunished, right? I felt bad, they weren't doing well. Usually your gut is generally right. And so the longer you delay, it creates more legal issues, but it also kind of poisons the well. Because coworkers will see that, and they'll see, well, why are they getting away with this poor performance, or well, they're not holding their own. So it has a kind of a toxic extension to it that you have to be aware of. So again, exiting kind of poor performers soon, I think, is a good way of retaining the ones that you do want to keep. Upward mobility and giving the employees the resources to succeed, and knowing that they can, that there's not a glass ceiling there, that they can, go through that, I think is extremely important. That's really what generally comes in and out. If there's independent success and trust there, longevity and retention is maximized. And then I'm always a huge fan of, annual reviews are great, whatever, but they can be very formulaic. I like the informal reviews, the informal check-ins, not only when people are doing things poorly, right? Not just going to them when, hey, this wasn't in on time, or, where have you been the last 4 hours, or why didn't you respond to my email? Let's take those opportunities to express how, when they do something good, when they focus on the positive. I think that's almost more important, because that leads to recognition. It leads to they are being heard and they're being recognized. And that, at the end of the day, I feel is one of the biggest keys to employee retention. Really nothing legal about it, but really more just from an HR standpoint. So those are my 2 or 3 cents on this slide. Anybody else? Prem?
The HR in me is like screaming while you were saying that. So
yes.
I have to add this in too, right? And I think it kind of goes back to that first point of that strategic hiring, right? I think everyone on the call would agree. It's so much more difficult to replace that talent after having put all of that legwork into it. So really just kind of keeping that on the forefront and having a clean process from the jump pays such dividends in the long run. And then, of course, everything trickles into the culture. But, strategic hiring, at least in my eyes, is a huge component, just because everyone talks, everyone sees what's going on. So, nothing's worse for an organization's look when, someone leaves before that 90th day. I mean, ever, right? But especially inside of that 90 days. So, again, I'm sure this is known information, but that strategic hiring is something that, was very crucial, at least in my HR days, and even beyond, right? Being in the HCM space and helping folks out. So just wanted to kind of throw my points in there. So.
Yeah, put another way, I think the more time you spend on the front end, the more likely you'll have retained for a long period of time your employees. It's easier said than done, and sometimes you strike out. You'll strike out, but The days of like, I'm just gonna hire someone just to fill a role. I mean, sometimes you have to do that, but again, the more time you spent, this isn't necessarily how to interview question or how to really select it, but the more time you spend there, if you have the time, the less likely you're going to be to at least reach out to me or someone within your HR department. All right, so it looks like unless other people we have about 4 minutes left if there are any Q&A. Oh, there's another slide here, but I think this kind of reiterates what we're talking about unless anybody else wanted to add a little bit more on this slide. Kathleen, anything? I saw you went off. All right, well, again, this is a little bit duplicative, but I think it kind of sums up what we've kind of talked about today. And I do like the candidate experience is your employer brand. And I always say this with employees, my clients, right? When you're interviewing, right, they're interviewing you and you're interviewing them. It's kind of a two-way street. It's that way, whether they're an applicant or whether they are an employee. And so just remember that. And anybody who's has any Glassdoor reviews out there that are usually not very positive, keep this in mind as you're going through this whole process. So I don't see any questions. So I guess in that regard, on behalf of Saul Ewing and all of the companies here, the panelists, we just want to thank you for joining us today. A reminder that a follow-up email will follow today's materials the next couple of days. And if we didn't get to your question, or if you have a question that you wanted to send to Prem or send to Kathleen or just send to me, our contact information is there. We'd be happy to be available. But appreciate your time and happy Cinco de Mayo, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.